I've got a very special guest joining us right here on the India Development Debate, and India's former Finance Minister, Mr. Chidambaram, joins us right here. Thank you very much, Mr. Chidambaram, for being with us. You called today a day of reckoning. You called today a day that could possibly have seen the resignation of India's RBI governor, perhaps his deputy. That was the speculation, that was the big fear when this high-stake meeting began. Are you heaving a sigh of relief, before I ask you any other thing, that at least that has been averted? That big calamity has been averted?
From what I gather and from what I glean from the official press release, it appears that government has stepped back, and the government has also been conciliatory on issues of concern to the government. And I think that's good. To some extent, I think the voices that were raised over the last few weeks, especially the former governors, the former directors on the board like Mr. Maligam, those wise voices seem to have had some influence in the government. And I'm therefore happy that the government has stepped back.
Okay, so you are at least happy that the government has stepped back. But sir, if I may get into the substantive parts of the RBI press release, and it very categorically says that the big issue, and you believe that everything else is a smokescreen, the big bone of contention really was the reserves, really was the surplus capital. And in some sense, the board has decided to constitute an expert committee to examine the economic capital framework, the membership and terms of reference of which will be jointly determined by the government on one hand and the RBI on the other. How do you review this? Do you believe this is a welcome exercise? At least the two stakeholders will be able to sit across the table and talk on this issue instead of, a bitter battle of words playing out in full public domain. Surplus is an important issue. There needs to be more predictability and more objective way to deal with it.
The surplus is a technical issue. It's not something which everyone can understand, and it's not something which can be discussed and resolved at a board meeting where the participants are from different walks of life and not necessarily domain experts. It's a highly technical issue. It must be examined by technically qualified people, by people with great experience of central banking and the role of a central bank. Therefore, I think it's a welcome decision to appoint a committee. Such committees have been appointed before. To my recollection, there were at least two committees before, and they recommended different proportions to the assets of the RBI. So another committee to examine the surplus as a proportion to or the reserves as a proportion to the assets of RBI is welcome. I was not happy that the statement said the terms of reference on the composition will be jointly decided. And that was not a very happy phraseology. They should have said a committee will examine and left it there. I think the government wanted to make the point that it will jointly decide the composition and the terms of reference. If that is a issue of the ego, so be it. But I think those words could have been avoided.
Fair point indeed, and I think there are plenty of references to the board even in this release. If I may draw your attention to an important point, and one of those points is that the board, while deciding to retain the CRAR at 9%, has actually just extended the capital conservation buffer by 1 year. Do you believe on that count the RBI has had its way, because the government wanted that 9% to be reduced by 8%, and there were plenty of voices within the government that kept saying that how India is even more stringent than Basel norms, and for a growing economy and a developing economy like ours, we perhaps need a little bit of a relaxation there. Do you believe there could have been more give and take, or do you believe the RBI has done the right thing by retaining it at 9% and extending the capital conservation buffer by a year, which is the end of March 2020?
That was purely a function of the RBI, more specifically a decision to be taken by the governor, whether the last tranche should be extended by 1 year or not is a matter for the governor to decide. The board could have tried to persuade the governor to extend it by a year. The governor could have agreed. There was no reason to say that the board agreed to extend the last tranche of the buffer. It's no part of the board's business to extend or curtail the buffer. It's no part of the board's business to say what the CRAR shall be. It's no part of the board's business to fix a time limit. It's entirely an RBI function, and I'm slightly disappointed that the governor gave in on that sentence. He should have said, the sentence should have read, the board requested the governor to consider whether the last tranche of the CRAR could be extended by 1 year.
No, fair point, and which is why I say the references to the board are numerous and one can keep counting them, because there's yet another reference. And two quick last questions before I let you go, sir. And one of them is that the PCA norms with regard to banks under PCA, and there was this big noise about those being relaxed. As far as that matter is concerned, the RBI press
sorry,
release...
you are not listening to me. I'm sorry, you're not listening to me. I can't hear you.
Sure, go ahead, sir.
The other reference to the board is correct. The other reference to the board is correct because that is only advisory.
But as former finance minister, do you believe these were issues that required such a bitter standoff between the government and the RBI? I mean, most of these issues could have been resolved. It has, after all, gone down to one committee in one instance. It's gone down to an advisory panel in one. I mean, why did there have to be such a bitter standoff to the extent that one was mulling over, is the governor going to resign? Will his deputy be asked to step down? I mean, in some sense, there's been a lack of maturity on both sides.
I don't know about the RBI side, but I certainly know there is lack of maturity on the part of the government side. I think government's motives to start with were not honest or transparent. If they have become less dishonest now, if they have become more accommodative now, I welcome that. But I think the government's motives, as recently as a few days ago, were not honest and were not transparent. I don't think these issues should have been escalated to this level. A 9-hour board meeting. I think these matters could have been resolved by the finance minister and the governor having lunch together and spending just an hour or even less. The conclusions arrived at today's RBI board meeting could have been arrived at with far less bitterness at a lunch meeting between the governor and the finance minister lasting no more than an hour.
Fair point. A quick question, sir, and I'll let you go after this, Mr. Chidambaram, and that question has to do with the reason why a lot of people were losing sleep over surplus transfer or reserve transfer was because the demand for that was stemming from fiscal concerns in New Delhi. There is a weak fisc, and which is why people were worried, is this money in a pre-election year? What is this going to do? Is this going to lead to some kind of a euphoria that the government will do in a pre-election year? Is this going to stoke inflation further? In some sense, as somebody who keeps an eye on India's fiscal space, are you heaving a sigh of relief that at least that money is not coming to RBI in any rush? Through the government in any rush?
Of course, even if that money was coming, I'm not sure that money should be used to bridge the hole or fill the hole in the fisc. There are other uses for that money, if at all that money should come to the government. I'm happy that the government has been told in no uncertain terms, you deal with the problem of the fiscal deficit. Why did the government give up 70,000 crore of borrowing and boasted about it? There was no reason to give up 70,000 crore of borrowing in the second half of the financial year. Be that as it may, I'm happy that the reserves are not being touched to fill the possible hole in the fiscal deficit.
All right. On that note, as somebody who keeps a close eye on India's economic and fiscal position, it's always good to chat with you, sir. Thank you very much for sparing time and speaking to us this evening on what is thanks very much, sir, on what is a big and a crucial RBI board meeting, one that has taken a few calls, but on the face of it, it looks like the RBI has been able to hold its ground without having being made to cede too much space.